Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. If you do find yourself restoring a classic unloved car like this one here, you'll find yourself having to do a lot of work, a lot of prep work before it even goes into primer, and this is no exception. So I've been busy in the workshop. This is the door that we previously put a repair panel here, and there was also a repair here. As well as that, it was covered with dings and dents. So I've already done the filler work, and it was very difficult for me to work out whether it was flat or not. So what I did is I've just put a coat of primer on there and blocked it down, and to be honest, it's actually looking pretty straight. And also another area that I've been working on is this footwell area here underneath the dashboard, and this was covered in glue where the old carpet was, and it's very difficult to remove. I ended up just using a scraper to remove most of the glue, and then I've used a little sander. It's not quite ready yet for any kind of primer. I still need to spend a bit more time in here, but yeah, took a lot of work just to get it there. So when doing body work on this scale, doing a whole car, it can get very difficult, and it's very easy to miss any imperfections and dents. And previously on this door that we stripped the paint off, I did guide coat it, and I've just run over there with a block, and although I couldn't feel any imperfections by hand previously, it's actually highlighted a couple of little issues. So the guide coat has really made these areas pop, along with having the bare metal there. You can see that there's a dent there, but to be honest, I can barely feel it. And the same down here, there's actually a tiny little imperfection here that I probably would have missed. So if the dents were any bigger than this, I'd certainly try working them out a little bit, manipulating them with the hammer and dolly, but in this case, they don't need anything more than some body filler. So if you watch the previous videos on the little Daihatsu mirror project, a lot of the dents I actually removed. I just used a generic body filler like this here, and also I did use a splash of this here, which is just fiberglass. So when it comes to body filler is body filler, isn't it? Well, it's kind of not really like that. Something like this here I would consider a medium grade body filler, which is great for just little dings and dents, and something like this here is just a generic FRP paste. But what I'll be using on the Beetle is actually products like these. These are considered more of a professional type body filler. You have this one here which says 80, it's actually really gloopy stuff. I mean, this is really thick body filler, all the way up to this one here, which is almost a consistency of cream. It's just really fine, easy to sand, and it just goes on like a liquid. So depending what kind of repair you're doing, you can actually base it up with a heavier filler first and then finish it off with a light one. Another thing I've noticed with body fillers over the years, you can do repair and it sinks. Sometimes you actually have an imperfection in the body filler and you can only notice it after it's painted a little while later and it sinks. But this stuff here apparently is anti-shrink body filler. So we'll see how we get on with that. So 3 different flavors of body filler. I should be able to tackle any kind of body work with that. But not only that, it's a hell of a lot bigger than the ones you get from your car shop. Another thing you might have noticed that there's just random blobs of filler on the rear wing and the quarter panel. What I normally do, in this case I was body fillering the door, and I did have a little bit left over on my spreader, so any obvious dents, I don't like wasting this kind of stuff, and I'll just use it in random places. So the rear deck lid's fitted. I've already guide coated it. I do know that there are some big dents and creases either side here. Also, this is interesting, is the rust, the surface rust that's actually appeared on this deck lid. As you probably remember, this was bare metaled a long time ago and just left in the workshop. And look at that, it's already started rusting. So what you can do, if you've actually bare metaled a panel, you can give it a light coat of zinc, and that will hold back most of the surface rust. I would not suggest using any types of oils or anything like that, because you will be painting in it and it will react and you'll struggle to get all that stuff off again. Another thing that's worth mentioning about this kind of surface rust, I have actually seen this before with bare metal panels, and I think what's actually happened is when I bare metal this, it was extremely hot in Japan and my hands were sweaty. I wasn't wearing any gloves, and touching them like this and leaving sweat on the actual panel will cause it to surface flash rust really quickly, and I believe that's what's happened to this. I mean, it is coming off pretty easy with the DA. So I kind of have a theory on the rust, but I'm not entirely sure what's happened here. You can see that there's a crease here in the guide coat, but not only that, there's a high spot that goes around here, and there's also a matching one here. I mean, that's a kind of crazy circle bang in the middle of this deck lid. And there's also a couple of little high spots down here, another little crease, a couple of little dings and dents, but this is actually the main problem. So what I'm actually going to do is I'll just use a hammer and dolly just to get this a little bit better, and then what I'm going to do is body fill the area. I've just had a really crazy thought about this dent, and I'd love to know your opinion on this. If you wouldn't mind just writing something in the comments. We know that the bottom half of the valance has had some kind of shunt, so we can assume that this was fitted as well. But what if the vehicle that actually hit the back of this Beetle had a spare wheel on the front of it, and that's the impression it's left? Please let me know in the comment. I'd really like to know your thoughts on that. So I've just used the hammer and dolly just to work on the high spots on this deck lid, and it's not looking so bad. When I'm using a hammer and dolly, I do try to get the panel flat as I can, but failing that, I don't mind if it goes a little bit further and turns into a small dent, because I will be using body filler on this. So I've just cleaned up the area using my DA sander with an 80 grit and an interference pad, and it's already looking pretty good. It's managed to get rid of a lot of the surface rust, and now that's all keyed up, I'm ready to put some filler on. So I need to be putting some filler down here, here and around here, maybe a couple of other bits. But what I'll be doing is, instead of just concentrating on these areas here, I'll actually be fillering an area probably about that big. So the trick is here is to actually overfill the area. You want the filler to be slightly proud, so then when you block it down, it's level. If you try and concentrate on smaller areas like this and sand it back, you'll end up having to put more and more filler in and taking it out again. So make sure you just put a little bit too much on the area. So back to the fillers, I've got the larger dented areas which I'd use this for. I've got the medium repairs here, and then I've just got a fine filler here. So what I'll be using is this one here. So I'll be using quite a generous amount of body filler here, because I won't only be using it to repair the dents on the deck lid, I'll also be using it to fill some of these dents on this door too. So as you're applying the filler, it is actually going off, and if you find that your filler is dragging and getting chunky like this, don't use it, walk away. The thing is, when the filler becomes this kind of consistency, where if you try and use it, it will actually look like a house brick. But not only that, it doesn't actually stick as well as a smooth filler. So what does it look like? Well, it's got too much filler on. What I normally do is I overfill the areas and then I block them down to where I need it to be, instead of trying to apply smaller amounts of filler and then repeating it over and over again, building the filler up. I prefer just to do one large filler section instead. So the only thing to do now is just wait for the filler to dry. But I'm not going to wait for it to dry. In fact, it is touch dry. It still does feel a bit soft. But what you can do if you're doing a lot of rough filler work is you can actually start shaping it right now. So just using some coarse paper, that's about an 80 grit and a sanding block, you are actually able to start shaping the filler already and get rid of some of these large chunky bits while it's drying. So to block those bits down to some kind of shape took no time at all, using quite a coarse grit paper and a block. So the idea is just to get that rough shape. Don't try and take all the filler out or anything like that, because there's a lot of sanding to do after this point. So I've just applied some guide coat to the fillered areas, and I'm going to reblock this, sand it back using something like a 120. If you're going to go straight over with primer, you probably want to use something a little bit finer, something like a 320, maybe a little bit finer than that. But I'm actually going to be putting another coat of the really fine filler over this area just to get it nice and straight, because there are quite a few little dings and dents hidden in this deck lid, and I want to get all of them. So that worked out really well. I can barely feel any imperfections at all on that. I'm still going to put another coat of the fine filler over the top just to avoid any pinholes and scratches and things like that. But that actually turned out pretty well. Another thing is, it may look like there's a huge amount of filler in that area, but it is actually transparent. So there's not that much left of the original filler we've put in. So that's the Moody deck lid coming along, and also I need to look at the door. The door will actually be taken off, and I'll do that separately. I really need to have a look at this bonnet. So a common area on these bonnets for rust and cracks is actually just here. They tend to split, and in this case it had a tiny little split forming, so I've just blobbed a bit of weld on there and ground it back. I'm actually pretty happy with the way the bonnet fits. The big problem is this crease along the front, and also I do need to get rid of the rest of the old flaky paint here and do something with this area. So I need to DA sand pretty much the whole thing down, and then try and maybe hammer and dolly some of these a bit better before I get into the bodywork stage on this. So that's the door guide coated, and I've blocked it down. I've used a 120 grit on a long sander just to take this area of filler work down, and also just to check for any more imperfections. So just using that block, it has actually highlighted a couple of areas that I'd previously missed. And there is a couple of high spots around here as well, almost like a slight ripple in the panel. So with old cars, it's not uncommon to see these kind of ripples in panels. You've got to just be realistic that this car has been through the wars, and so have a lot of other cars. I mean, there's quite a few options. One of them is a high build filler primer that you spray out of a spray gun, really big nozzle on your spray gun, and then you can knock it back and it will actually get rid of a lot of this kind of stuff. And the other option is to use a very fine filler like a glaze to go over the whole area. So what I'm going to do is apply a coat of fine filler over these areas. And there's quite a few products out there in the UK that I've used that does pretty much the same thing. One of the products is called Dolphin Glaze. It comes in a little sachet, and it really is very watery. It's like cream, and you mix it up with the hardener and you just scree it on, and you can take it back and it will get rid of a lot of these imperfections. I'm going to use this stuff here because I'm interested to see how it would work. I reckon it'd be pretty much the same thing. And I'll also be using the same method where if there's a dent here, I pretty much overfill the area, then take it back. So for instance, this area here, this whole area will get a coat of filler. So that looks like total overkill, but the areas of imperfections under here are so spread out that if you put filler over the whole area and then you sand it back, it will actually save you putting more and more and more filler on there and sanding it back, and this will actually speed up the process. And another thing to bear in mind, once all this is blocked off, you're probably going to lose half that filler anyway on the floor. So I've just used a long block and some 120 paper to take down this filler, and to be honest, wow, what's left is just a super smooth finish. And although it looks like there's a lot of filler in this door, but it's actually opaque in areas like this, and there's a very fine amount of filler on there, but yeah, the finish is amazing. And what I can do now is, this is pretty much ready for primer, a little bit more maybe here and there, but yeah, really happy with that. And while I was waiting for the filler to dry, I've actually gone ahead and started cleaning up these heater channels here, just using the wire wheel on the grinder just to remove any of the crust, and it's looking super solid. I will be putting some rust treatment primer in these areas before the actual primer goes on. And I've also managed to bare metal the bonnet, and it's uncovered a couple of little dings and dents here and there. Nothing serious, but also what I've done is areas across here where it had some kind of damage. I have actually managed to work out a lot of these dents just using the dolly and a hammer, and all I need to do is maybe a light skim of filler over the area. So I had some filler left over while I was doing the door, so what I've done is I've just put some on the deck lid and sanded it back. And yeah, most of the imperfections are now removed. It is extremely smooth, so that is almost ready for primer. So while I'm waiting for that filler to dry, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to sort out these gutters. I mean, they're a bit scuzzy in areas, and these gutters on Volkswagens love to rust. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use this stuff here, which is a paint-on primer with rust inhibitor in, and I'm going to pop that on there now, probably put a couple of coats on there, let it dry, and then what I'll do is I'll key it up before the primer goes on. So at this point with the Beetle project, it really is a game of finding the dents and deleting them with body filler. And I've got quite a few dents to get on with. So I'm going to carry on with this, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in as always. Cheers!